Welcome to Rainbow Vision Network, a radio show reaching beyond the limitations of our minds and beliefs into a world of inspiration and empowerment where the impossible is possible. To talk directly to the host or guest, call 347-637-2650 and press 1. To learn more about your host, Betsey, her new riveting books on Amazon, Communicating with the Other Side, True Experiences of a Psychic Medium, and Angels, Aliens, and Prophecy 2, be sure to check out Betsey's scheduled events, her predictions, and her Earth News One blog at betseylewis.com, BetSeylewis. And now, your host, author, international psychic medium, Earth Keeper, and Earth Mysteries investigator, Betsey Lewis.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the show on this Wednesday, December 3rd, 2014. I am so excited to have such a special guest tonight. Her name is Sandra Corcoran, and she's a shamanic counselor, and she has had some amazing spiritual lessons from her beautiful indigenous teachers, and I can tell you the book is fabulous. I can't even begin to tell you how wonderful it was. I couldn't put it down. But let me tell you a little bit about Sandra. And after her loss, after losing a child, she found that working with Native elders and indigenous wisdom keepers throughout North, Central, and South America opened her heart to the immensity of living energies of the cosmos and discovered her shamanic gifts. As she learned to discern these living energies and work with them, she also discovered the middle path between the soul's dark and luminous energies, striking the balance that allows us to fulfill our destiny. So we're going to be talking about her book tonight, which is Shamanic Awakening, My Journey Between the Dark and the Daylight. And she is, like I said, a shamanic counselor trained for over 30 years in traditional and esoteric healing techniques throughout the Americas and Europe. She is the co-founder of the Star Process Soul Retrieval Method and offers workshops and sacred journeys nationally and internationally. She has a private practice in Massachusetts, so be sure and visit her website, which is starwalkervisions.com. So how are you, Sandy? Welcome to the show tonight. Sandy, are you there?
I am here. How are you?
Great. Great to have you on the show tonight. You
Thank
just
you
returned
so
from Egypt, didn't you?
Yes, about a week ago I got back, and it was just an amazing trip. The Egyptian people are so welcoming, and of course it's such an ancient land. There wasn't anything that wasn't interesting.
Oh, I can imagine. I can imagine. How long were you there?
Just about 3 weeks. It really deserves a lot more time than that, but I have a lot of obligations back here in the States, and that was the amount of time I was able, to give to the trip this time.
Mm-hmm. Well, wow, that's wonderful. Now, have you been there before, or was this your first trip there?
No, this was my first trip there. It has kind of been on my list for a long time, but the stars hadn't arranged themselves for me to be able to be there until this year, and we had originally intended to go last year, but the climate over there had made it a bit difficult, and many of the people on the trip felt it would be better if we waited another year before we attempted it.
Yeah, I was wondering about that, if things were a little bit dicey over there. Are they still a little scary?
Actually, it's so funny. My mother was quite upset. She had seen a number of things on Egypt and people being hurt in Gaza, on the Giza Plateau, and back in Egypt, we were watching all the problems happening in Ferguson. So it was, the media has this way of playing up what is very detrimental in any country, and that ends up what gets being seen on TV.
Right. Amazing. Well, let's start off at the beginning in your book. And I know often catastrophic events that take place in our lives are necessary to awaken us to another path that we've ignored for years. And you lost your first child, and how devastating that was for you. But tell us what happened next. I mean, there was a lot of things that you were going through. You ended up going through a divorce. So how did you get on this path? What led you there?
Well, at the time, I was a special needs teacher, and I had a special needs child. I had a Down syndrome child who totally was the light of both my husband at that time in my life. She brought great joy wherever she was. But she needed open heart surgery, and like many Down's children, the difficulties with her heart were more profound than they were able to correct. And so she lasted for about 10 weeks after the surgery, and she passed away at home in my arms. I did not expect that, neither did the doctors. And none of us expect to outlive our child. Any death is difficult, but the death of a young child is nothing I would ever want to wish on anybody. And about 10 weeks after that, I used to go in the car and just drive around at night because I couldn't sleep and I couldn't think, and in many ways I didn't want to be here, and I don't mean that in terms of any kind of suicidal way. I just didn't know what to do with myself anymore. And I stopped one evening at a place because I had to desperately relieve my bladder and entered the building not knowing what it was about, but there was actually a workshop going on. And when I left the building, when I left the bathrooms, I couldn't leave the building. It was like something was holding my feet to the ground. And so I just kind of sat on a chair outside the auditorium lecture hall and listened and watched this woman give a lecture. To this day, I don't remember what she said, but at the end of the lecture, I went up to her to thank her because I had begun to at least feel my body and hear some words again. And she told me she was going to start to work with me, that I was one of the reasons why she had come, that I had made a promise to the Great Mystery that I would do the work to help other people and open my path, and she intended to start to teach me. And pretty much was passed on from one native grandmother after another until I started to kind of get my feet back under me again.
Sandy, that's amazing that she was waiting for you, isn't it? It's just incredible. You must have been blown away by that.
Well, it's funny because the next, I came back because she sort of ordered me to, and at that point I was following I didn't know what to do with my life. And so I went the next morning, but I was collapsed in tears again in the bathroom, and I just thought, who is this person and why am I here, and how dare she tell me I have to start to study with her? I'm not going to do this. I'm going to leave. I can't possibly sit through anything in this state. And I opened the bathroom stall, and she was standing with her back to the door, not letting me out. And she said,
"Oh no!"
I know, it was kind of a face-off. And she was quite gentle at that point. She didn't know me at all, and she said, "I lost my first daughter too. I know how painful this is. Now pull yourself together and get out there."
Wow.
So
she had a premonition of you coming, or what do you think that was all about? It was just meant to be. I don't believe in accidents. There's no coincidences out there.
No, I don't believe in accidents. I do believe there are points in time when synchronistic things occur, and I think for some reason she recognized in my field or in my light body what was going on with me, because it's been my experience with most of the Native teachers that or mentors that have schooled me over the years that they do seem to have a sixth sense of what's going on with you and have been able to direct me at the times I've needed it, merely by looking at me and knowing what has to happen next, as opposed to me telling them anything or them questioning me about anything.
Now, your first teacher was Tawila, is that correct?
No, my first teacher was Ocean of Fast Wolf, but my longtime mentor, the one I studied with the longest, was Grandmother Twyla Nietzsche, and she was just an amazing, amazing woman. She had such grace and such kindness and such intellect, and I studied with her for about 14 years.
Wow. Wow. Tell us a little bit about her, because she was so interesting, and she did pass away, right?
Yes, she passed away August of 2007. She was a small woman in stature, but she made up for it with her energy. She just exuded fun and interest and delight in everything. And she would challenge you all the time. Every time you thought you knew the truth, she would challenge you to take it one step further. She always made us carry a thesaurus around with us, because she felt words had power of their own volition, and they all carried a vibration, and if we weren't going to express ourselves with the right vibration, we weren't going to get the right thought across. And she taught through a series of medicine wheels that she and her mother Blue Flower had put together, because the Native people have all come from oral traditions, and the Seneca people were the philosophers of the Iroquois Six Nations. And so she and her people tried to figure out a way to bring the information to non-Native people through using the medicine wheel as a tool of philosophy and explanation. And it's quite a powerful tool. I use it all the time in my counseling practice, because it just allows a person to see in such a clear fashion what their gifts of birth are and what the things they've brought in with themselves to learn, so that they can stand whole on the medicine wheel, observing themselves from the center as opposed to from any of the spokes on the outer part of the wheel. So right away you start to look at yourself from a whole being instead of a fragmented being.
Had you been drawn to Native American culture before, indigenous cultures, or was this something totally new for you?
I had always been curious about archaeology and biology and psychology, and growing up as kind of a child of the late 60s, we were exposed to many different cultural experiences, and at that point the world was really opening up, not as it is today via Facebook and Twitter and all of that. It's a much more global world than it was in the 60s, but people's minds were opening up in a different way, and there was a different sense of how diversity could expand you and help you, as opposed to a more prejudicial view that might have occurred prior to that. So my interest was always in finding cultures and the diversity of other people, and curiously seeing how that fit in with my life, because I come from a very, what I would call a very white bread world. I come from parents who stayed together, and they were very Catholic, and we had a very large family of children, and we all grew up in the 50s, and so there was that model to break away from, at least for me.
Interesting. Wow. So that was quite a dichotomy for you to go through that. How amazing. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, in retrospect, it was fascinating to me every step of the way. To my parents at the time, it wasn't fascinating at all. My father was a principal, and when I left teaching to do much more diverse stuff and travel to South America and to some of the native reservations, he just couldn't understand why I would give up a job with a pension for something that had no promise to it. But it has really shaped my life and been the most promising thing I could have done at the time.
Wow. Now, I wanted to ask you about this. I know you went through a divorce after the loss of your child, but a lot of people go through that. And why do you think that happens after the loss of a child? And do you think there's any way of saving a marriage from such an emotional loss?
Yes, I do think there's a way of saving a marriage. I think two people have to be willing to work at it because everybody grieves in different ways. In my particular case, it wasn't that my daughter's father was a bad person or an unconscious person. In part, we just grew in very different directions because we'd been married in our 20s. But once we lost Callie, it became much more difficult to agree on the same things in terms of how we were growing consciously and spiritually. And, you know, we were warned of that when she passed by the doctors. And we did try therapy for a while, but in our case, we parted very good friends, and to this day are still good friends. So in our case, it worked to the best for both of us moving forward. For some people, it doesn't happen that way, and I do think many people do stay together, but they have to deal with that wound because it's a very, very deep, raw wound. I mean, 30 years later, I can still feel the same emotion. It's in a more controlled way than it was then because I had no control over it then, but I can easily go back to that moment and fill up with tears again, and that was 30 years ago.
Wow. That's so devastating because children are not supposed to go before their parents. I mean, that's just not the natural way. And we think of ourselves, you know, that we go and we're the first to go. But I can't even imagine what you've experienced and what others have experienced out there. But you are a very brave soul. And, you know, I think you, like I said, a lot of catastrophic and devastating things happen to us, which kind of awaken us to do other things that we were meant to do. And I think there is a plan always in the universe for us, no matter how devastating it is. Do you think is that how you feel?
Yes, I definitely think that though we have free will, so the plan isn't set in stone, there are certain things that for our own personal growth or to move past our karmic seeds or to be able to enliven or enlighten ourselves, to be more conscious of why we're here, I do think sometimes it takes something that brings you to your knees to be able to realize how magnificent this world is and as human beings, what potential and possibilities we have. I don't think everybody has to have a devastating thing happen to them to understand or realize that, but I think the majority of people who do go through something dramatic or traumatic like that hit such a deep, raw spot in themselves that sometimes the only way to get out of it is to be able to be aware of the divine spark that's always connected to, I don't know what you want to call it, God, great mystery, the absolute, the one. I mean, there's 100 different names for it, but essentially there's something that is greater than all of us, of which we are all a part, and we become our own unique expression of that divinity. And I believe the way we live here, the consciousness and the conscientiousness and the accountability, is the gift we bring back to the one for having had the opportunity to be in human form.
How true, how true. Now, you have been so adventurous. You have traveled all over and worked with wisdom keepers throughout Central and South America since the early 1900s and learning their traditions, their rituals, and healing. And tell us a little bit about that. I know that, tell us about some of the teachers, too, and what you experienced. Were you with a group of people?
A group of people or just a couple of individuals. I worked in the U.S. with 4 different Native elders from different nations. And when I was working with Grandmother Twyla, one of the gifts that she helped train me in is the fact that I'm a dream decoder, which means I can go into the dream and help you decode the information that your subconscious and higher self is trying to bring to you, or your multi-dimensional self is trying to impart to you. And through a series of dreams and a series of synchronistic things that happened, at one point she said to me that I had been working in North America with the women, and it was time now to go to Central and South America and work with the men. And that, put the prayer out to the mystery, and it would happen the way it was meant to happen. And within a very short time, I found myself in South America. Did not work with the original person I went down with. We had very different opinions on things. But through that particular journey, met who would become my primary teacher in South America, and that is Juan Núñez del Prado. I had worked with a couple of different wisdom keepers down there, but Juan had and still is one of my primary mentors down there. And then when I was working on the STAR process and concretizing that as a methodology to work with soul retrievals with my then healing partner at the time, she and I took people a number of times throughout Mexico, and that's when I met other elders down there and did some individual work with them as well. So I've been very blessed in my life to have the honor of calling many of those people friends as well as mentors in my life.
How beautiful. How beautiful. I wanted to ask you, is it important to seek out a shaman, guru, spiritual teachers to learn these lessons? Because it was very beneficial for you. So many people out there are probably looking for, that special teacher, that shaman. What do you suggest to people?
Well, that's an interesting question, because I think one of the things that's happened in the last couple of years, as everybody rushes to have a spiritual experience, whether that's in, India or Tibet or South America, is many times we give our power away to the teacher. And many times the teacher is on a path just like we are towards consciousness and enlightenment. So though I do feel it's important when you're doing the work in different cultures to follow the foundation of, and that can be in anything, whether it's a rabbi or a priest or a shaman or a medicine person, it is important to follow the structure of the tradition. But I don't think everybody needs to run out and find a shaman or a medicine person, because I just don't think that is the way of it. I think some people are called to be doctors, and some people are called to be teachers, and some people are called to be firemen, and some people are called to follow the shamanic path. And I think it's gotten very bastardized over the last, I would say, 10 years, where everybody needs a big crystal, or everybody needs to go to Peru, or everybody needs to, call themselves something that they're not. In the tradition of the people, nobody ever called themselves a shaman or a medicine person. That was the designation the people or the tribe gave you for seeing the skill set you had. So even when I have worked with many well-qualified people, they will never call themselves a medicine person or a shaman. They will always just say, I'm a person just like you, and this is my skill, and I'm willing to share it with you. I had a teacher many years ago. Her name was Maya Perez, and she said that everybody is a teacher for somebody else, and the simplest way is to listen to your heart and know that sometimes a friend or a parent or the person at the toll booth can be a teacher for you. It's not about having to spend thousands of dollars to go someplace.
And, I think we get lessons all the time. Sometimes we're not aware of those lessons that we get every day with our families, with our friends, right? So
right,
you're so
exactly.
right about who it could be.
And I think so many people are, it's such a global world now that so many people want to run away from their family of origin or their community and learn from somebody outside of it. And if you look around this world, what we all need to do is make community with our families and each other, and before we take it to the greater picture. We can't ignore the microcosm for the macrocosm. We just can't do that anymore. It's very clear and evident in this world. We need to pay attention to each other in different ways.
Absolutely. I wanted to ask you about your second daughter and the blessings and the things that you performed. I thought that was so beautiful about your daughter, and as she was growing, she seemed very spiritual, and I think that's so important. I think ceremony is important in a lot of ways, but talk about that and what you went through and about your daughter, because she does seem very evolved. You laugh.
I'm laughing because she is. She's my best friend, and she is an amazing young woman. And that sometimes makes it hard to be a young woman. You know what I'm saying? She was born after she was conceived in a ceremony. I had an ectopic pregnancy and a number of miscarriages after I lost my first daughter. So they weren't very sure whether I could carry again. And the ceremony made it possible to bring her soul forward, even though she also signed the contract to come forward. But it was a pregnancy that went to full fruition. She was born in the hospital, but she was also born in a ceremony. My doctor allowed me to have a ceremony in the room, which was unheard of at the time. And she has had many interesting experiences in her life. I think she's a very conscious soul. And I don't know what other question you might have regarding her, but she's a pretty amazing woman.
Your doctor thought you were out of your mind, didn't she?
Pretty much. Pretty much. It was the first time they had ever allowed sage and sweetgrass, and the bed had to be turned a certain direction, and she allowed me to do all that. And she put a sign on the door because within this ceremony there's no admittance of anybody else, because things like hospitals and prisons and places like that have a lot of dense energy in them that aren't generally cleaned out, so I had to clean the room out first energetically. And all throughout the delivery I could see little eyes looking in the window trying to figure out what was going on, because unbeknownst to me she had put a big sign on the outside that said Native American birth, no admittance.
Oh, no. Oh. So has your daughter pursued some type of spiritual path like you, or?
We all come to that differently. She kind of rebelled a little bit against that in her early teen years because she thought it was odd. She's very well schooled, however, after that in philosophy and metaphysics and astrology, pretty much self-taught, is able to pick up quite a few instruments and just know how to play them. Right now, she just is finishing up a trip to India and Bali. She attended her roommate from college's wedding in India and then decided she needed some downtime. So she's having her own experiences. I wouldn't say she's followed my path by any stretch of the imagination, but she has her own way of doing things. And I don't think she's quite found where she wants to land yet. But she's still only 28 years old, so I certainly didn't know where I was at. Yes, she's still young.
And, all these new children are coming into the world right now. They have so many gifts. They're psychic. They see spirits, and I know you have. And they are just so amazing telepathic. They remember past lives. And, I think a lot of them are fearful of their gifts. And I'm hoping and praying that these children, realize that it's okay for them to see that. I've been watching different shows that feature these children, and it sounds like your daughter is like that too. And you, of course, have experienced all these things. And I wanted you to talk about the spirits and also the extraterrestrials that you have been involved with, because that is amazing. I was just so amazed when you put that in your book, and I'm so glad. I know you were hesitant about adding those things, but talk about that.
I was very hesitant about adding those things. I mean, I'm a psychotherapist, and I've been a teacher. I was well known in my community. Not even members of my family knew some of that, most of that. Whereas children coming in now seem to be more aware and more in-tuned, I think, coming from the generation I had to forget all of that as being fantasy and then have to relearn that those things that I was experiencing were realities for me. At the time I started to remember my experiences, Graham Twyla was one of the first ones that helped me with some of that, because all the indigenous people have oral traditions of memories of when the star beings or the star people came down and helped their nations in different ways. So for them, it wasn't outside the box. Even the Vatican has for years had people that they have assigned to that study of interdimensional possibilities, I'll say. To me, I have had experiences with what I would call a number of different off-planet races, whether that's interdimensional or extra-dimensional or multidimensional. It comes in different forms. Whether you want to see the ships that come as metallic, some of them are living beings. Some of them are just like our drones, monitors in this side of the galaxy. It's such a vast topic. Many people, I think, believe. I'd love to see disclosure in my time. I don't know if that's going to be possible, but almost every single government in the world has disclosed that they have this in their records, both militarily and socially with their people. So at some point I do think it's going to come full circle, and people are going to see it as not crazy and nothing to be made fun of, but possibly another thing to consider in this vast multidimensional world. And I think we're getting closer and closer to that with a lot. The new biology, quantum physics, different religious beliefs, what's happening now with DNA. I think there's a lot of influences that are allowing that to at least be discussed. And I think that's a beginning.
I totally agree with you. I think it's time for disclosure, and it's time that we all wake up to the fact that we're not alone in this universe, that there are many beings out there that have contacted us. I mean, there's so many legends and stories by indigenous people around the world that talk about these star beings. And I wanted to ask you about, you worked with the late Dr. John Mack, who was just incredible. Talk about that, and did you go through hypnosis, regressive hypnosis?
They did. I had a lot of my memories by the time I got to them, not all of them. What really triggered kind of my paradigm shift, my meltdown, I had attended I believe it was in 1998, there was a Star Wisdom Conference that was organized by Dr. Mack. And he through the Harvard Center for Psychology and Social Change, he was setting up a program called PEER, the Extraordinary Experience Research, that would research all the different hundreds of people who had these physical or ontological effects from their experiences. And at this particular conference, there were many different people. There were native teachers like Sequoia Trueblood, and there was Dr. Edgar Mitchell and Rudy Shield and Bud Hopkins and Noetic Science, represented, like I said, by Dr. Mitchell. There were many, many people. And one particular part of the conference was for nurses and psychotherapists who might have been having issues with some of their clients, who might have been talking about these kinds of things in very traumatic ways or very nonchalant ways that they might get some more information in the conference. And so one of the breakout rooms was for experiences to tell their tales. And when I was in the experiencer room, one of the people on the panel, it just kept bothering me. I knew him from someplace, and I had this whole kind of meltdown experience in the breakout room of remembering him from the ships. And at the same time, he had been working with Dr. Mack and Roberta Colasante, and he was talking about me. And
wow.
So eventually, when we both agreed to come together, our stories were very similar. We recognized each other from the ships. We recognized the same type of teachings, the same type of information that they were giving us. It was really quite uncanny, and I really thought at that point that I was really losing sight of what I had known as a reality. But Dr. Mack and Roberta, and just, the uncovering of all the different things through regression and through hypnosis and stuff, just brought me to realize that I'd been very blessed. I'd been given an opportunity, whether it was a choice or whether I had signed up for this in a different way, whether it was another multidimensional part of myself experiencing through my humanness that other aspect of myself. I mean, I can't tell you specifically what is real because I think those boundaries are still being explored. But I do think I've had some amazing experiences with that lets me know there's far more than us in this universe.
Now, you were taken to a underwater base, right? Tell us about that. That's really fascinating.
In one of my experiences, I was taken to an underwater base, which I believe there are many of them throughout the planet. It's almost like a biosphere underwater, where a lot of the ships come and go to explore the habitat. It was odd to me because when I didn't realize until, later on in life, I was a kid when I remember it, that I was in a biosphere setting, because within the context of these bubbles I could breathe and walk around and meet different beings. And in my mind, I was having some kind of a dream, and I couldn't understand how I could be breathing underwater with no apparatus. But later in life, as I explored that further, I realized they were like biospheres underneath the ocean. And they're riddled all over the world. They are in underground caverns. They are in our atmosphere. They're in our oceans. They've been here for a long time.
Do you know about the base that's been seen by satellite off the coast of Malibu, California?
No, I do not. That's interesting.
You don't? Maybe you were taken there. Yeah, they've captured this incredible place, and you can see it on satellite. It's just mind-blowing. And UFOs are just so prominent in Los Angeles, the whole area, Tonga Canyon, So there's been so many UFO sightings in California. It certainly makes sense.
It definitely does. I'll have to look into that. I know Lake Titicaca is another big area where they just see them come and go all the time. And to them, to the island of Tequila, they've all grown up just saying, yeah, that's normal. They come and go all the time.
Wow. Isn't that something? Why do you think the indigenous people have had so many experiences and encounters, and they think nothing of it? I mean, that's just natural for them. They go, okay, well, down in, after that big, huge sighting that was in Phoenix in 1997, the indigenous people there went, we see them all the time. They're here. We know it. Why do you think that is, that they communicate more with them than with the rest of us?
Possibly because they don't deny their existence. Possibly because the indigenous peoples have been on the earth for a long time and have seen the earth go through many permutations, and I think the earth has flipped on its axis a number of times. I know some of my Lakota teachers said they remember a time when the sun used to rise in the west. All the great flood stories, whether that's the earth flipping or Atlantis going down or whatever any of the other stories are. I just think there have been people on the globe, on the planet for a long time, and I don't think that interdimensional races started to explore us 50 years ago at Roswell. I think it's been going on a whole lot longer than that. You could go back in the history books all the way back to Sumeria, all the way back to Egypt. I mean, I just got back from Egypt, and in Abydos, on one of the reliefs of the wall, there's a whole hieroglyphic study of helicopters, submarines, jet planes, drones. Now, that was built 3,000 years ago.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes,
How
it is.
How could that be? Oh, yeah. There's just so many mysteries out there, and so many. I just think we have to keep an open mind to everything that's out there, because there's just so much for us to learn. And if we keep a closed mind, we're never going to evolve. We're never going to, awaken to all these incredible things that are here. Even, there's other realms, there's other dimensions. So how exciting. And I wanted to ask you, are these the ETs that you were involved with, were they the typical Greys or the Nordics or both?
Both. Greys, Nordics, another race of more blue-skinned creatures. I also had one very bizarre encounter with a reptilian. But it was very curious to me. It was after coming out of quite a detailed ceremony in Palenque, actually, and I was coming around one of the temples, and I did a double take because there was a gray there, and what it communicated to me is we are part of your DNA too. We are all in this together. And so just like there are bad Americans and good Americans, and bad Russians and good Russians, and bad Catholics and good Catholics, and bad Muslims and good Muslims, there are bad reptilians and those that want to advance too. Because let's not put any power in the hands of any kind of inter or extra dimensionals. They're all still trying to also make their way towards a higher level of enlightenment and going back to that grand plan, that one. They're ascending and learning at the same time we are. And what I was told is the planet Earth is not the only one ascending at this time, that all the planets in our solar system are all ascending at this time. That's why it's such a big deal.
Everything is changing vibration. Everything is going into a higher excuse me, higher vibration. Don't you believe that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you see that you see it so clearly on our planet. You see this diversity of, everybody saying, "Oh, it's getting worse," and there's more hostilities and more chaos and more destruction and more starvation and more deaths. But I think what's happening is you're really starting to separate the higher vibrations from the lower vibrations that can't hold on anymore to that level of being. It's just not going to be allowed to exist anymore. There's no more room for it. And the way Graham explained it is there will come a time, probably in our lifetime, where if we're able to hold the higher vibration, and all that is staying in the heart, forgiving yourself for how you had to learn your lessons, and forgiving the other person for being the teacher that taught it to you. But if you can hold that vibration of compassion and your own accountability, there will be a time when that which is dense, I'm not going to say bad, but that which is of a denser nature is not going to be in the same field as you if you're holding a higher vibration. And we all on Earth seem to judge it in terms of death, but death is merely a transition into another level of consciousness. It's not the end of the world. And who's to say where that line of ascension, whether it's in body or out of body, takes place?
Sandy, it's kind of interesting, but there are stories of people that have had ET encounters and also seen their departed family or friends with extraterrestrials. So it's kind of interesting. Are these realms all the same? Can they move through these different dimensions at ease? And, it seems like they can. They can go through walls and doors and anything material. So it would make sense that they could move from different dimensions, to our physical
Well, I think
reality.
it's a level of vibration. If you're able to bring your vibration down into dense matter, you can materialize here. If you're able to hold your vibration at a more refined level, maybe you're not so easily seen,
Right. That makes total sense. Now, you have also seen spirits, too, and I thought it was really interesting that you have seen Civil War soldiers, and you must have some connection with the Civil War era. Do you think so?
Yes, I know so. My father was a Civil War historical buff, and even though we're from Massachusetts, when I was born, he gave me the middle name of Lee after Robert E. Lee. And, I've done some past life stuff where I know that my dad was a Confederate soldier. And I don't know why, but it seems to me that, I have seen other specters or other disembodied energies, but for some reason most of the ghosts I see are from the Civil War, and it's a matter of being aware of their energies and helping them cross either through prayer or discussions, lighting a candle, doing my sacred pipe for them. It all depends on how they're stuck in between the worlds. Are you there?
Have you gone back in time? I mean, have you gone through, Ancestry.com to see if you had any family members that
no.
might have been in the Civil War? And
no, because I don't quite think it works that way. I think when we choose to come back in, I believe we kind of contract to overcome some of the karmic seeds we've possibly planted in a prior life or prior lives. And when we get here, I think we possibly forget that. I think there are a number of different energetic streams that run through us. I think there's an ancestral line. I think there's a personal karmic seed line. I think there's a God seed line. I think there's a number of different things that converge into the history of the divine spark of who we are in this particular lifetime when we land in on our birthday at a specific time and place. So I don't necessarily think I'd find any Confederate soldiers going back, but if my father had a past life, and I can't prove that as a Confederate soldier, that might be part of the influence in this life for me.
And I know that you've helped them pass over into the light, because a lot of energies, a lot of spirits get stuck in our material world, kind of in between world, kind of a limbo, and they don't know they have passed on, and they're afraid to go on, right?
Well, I think that happens to a lot of people who die in wars or in shocking car accidents or even sometimes in suicides, is they suddenly are stuck in that phase of what just happened. And even though part of them is separating, they're not quite fully ready to go into the light. They're stuck in earthbound reality because they want to gravitate back to that body or that family or that loved one or that time frame. And so, there's a little bit of wandering, confused, or angrily, or aimlessly, and so helping them cross enables them to free their spirit to be able to go into the light. That's how I see it. Other people might see it a different way.
I do too. I see it that way too. Now, there's so much going on with our planet right now, and earthquakes are increasing. A lot of people feel uneasy about the strange booms that are being heard all over the world. Do you think we're out of balance, totally out of balance right now? That we just have to get back to the goddess belief, the feminine. There's just so many things going on, and it just seems like there's just so much chaos right now.
I think there is a lot of chaos. I think it's humanity's collective consciousness clearing itself. I don't think it needs to be male-dominated or goddess-dominated, female-dominated. I think we have to merge that sacred marriage of the self of our divine masculine and divine feminine, no matter what our gender type is. Certainly we have to be a lot more conscious and accountable for what we're doing to the planet and what we're doing to the children on the planet. I think the elements of of nature herself are kind of condemning us. I think that's why you're seeing more earthquakes and more volcanoes and things of that nature. But I also think cyclically we're going through some astronomical things. We're also moving now past galactic center and that rift in the Milky Way, where we're coming out of the other side into a whole new era of how we know or what we don't know about consciousness and energy and how to move to another vibrational understanding of things. And so I think until we can equalize that in ourselves and then equalize that as a collective, you're going to see more and more of this as Graham would put it, the earth is shaking off the fleas. and with or without us. With or without us, she's going to shake it off.
How true. You wrote in the book about Maya Perez said that between the years 2010 and 2025, the doors will start to close and we will either ascend in consciousness or remain in suffering. And I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, and I think she and Graham Twyla, though they never knew each other, did agree on a couple of things, and that's what I was referring to before when Graham said that, the elevated vibration of those who would be able to hold a different level of consciousness and accountability would still be present in physical, but they wouldn't be as affected by some of the other things that were happening on the planet for those who hadn't stepped up to the plate. But the issue for everybody is we all have to step up to the plate. If we're all one being, we have to make this work together. And that doesn't mean we're all going to make it work together at the same time. I think this is a long plan. I think that we have multiple lifetimes to try and make it right in ourselves and try to make it right in whatever culture or gender or circumstances history finds ourselves in at that time. But certainly right now, we know very clearly what we're doing that isn't working. And
that's for sure.
Yeah.
And we have to get back to that oneness of everything, that everything is connected, and we are not separate from the trees, the plants, the animals. Everything should be honored, and I think that's so important. That's such an important lesson. We have to get back to ancient wisdom, indigenous wisdom, and I'm sure you've found that over and over in your teachers and what you also teach, that there is just the oneness of everything, and when we continue to separate ourselves from that oneness, we are out of balance.
And it's a day-to-day, minute-to-minute thing. I mean, I certainly am out of balance sometimes in my life, but what I do when I realize I'm out of balance, whether it's with another person or with myself, or I try and be aware of how I'm adding to that issue and how I can be more accountable, to a better understanding of that issue. And I think it's important for everybody to understand that most of us are doing the very best we can, minute to minute. And if we can remember to set a good intention, and then to pay attention to how that's coming into our lives, and then to be accountable for the change we wish to see in ourselves. We're not responsible for changing anybody else. We're responsible for the change in ourselves. And it keeps coming back to looking within first and taking that breath that goes from the heart to the head and equalizing that so that we can make better decisions. And hopefully that influences somebody else, even if it's just in a small way.
How true and how beautiful. I absolutely agree with you. We've just got a few more minutes, but I wanted you to take this time to give out all your information, how people can contact you, where they can buy your book, anything that you have coming up, because I know you do workshops and you travel. So go ahead and give all that information out.
Thank you. That's very kind of you. Well, first of all, my website is www.starwalkervisions.com. That's an S on the end of visions. My book can be picked up at Amazon or Barnes & Noble. It was published through Inner Traditions Bear & Company. I do have a private office, and that number is 508-435-2681, although sometimes because I travel a lot, the faster way to be in touch with me is sandy@starwalkervisions.com. I have a couple of big trips to Peru coming up next year in the fall, and all of that is on the website. And any workshops or teachings that I give will be posted on the website, as will a link to your radio show.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
I link everybody I've done a radio show with or a magazine article with is linked on the media page of my website. So.
Oh, thank you so much. And talk about your sessions, because I know you have a lot of different sessions that you work with people on.
I do soul retrievals, Star Process soul retrievals. That's a 2-hour in-person, very intense healing session. I do Seneca Earth Path energy charts, which is the body of work Graham taught me, and that's explained on the website. I do Thoth Tarot readings. I do private therapy sessions, and that can encompass a lot of things from body-oriented psychotherapy to Sue Stowe healings to Psych K sessions. And all of that is explained in great detail on the website. And I welcome any of your listeners to be in touch. If I don't get right back to them, it's not because I'm ignoring them. I always get back to everybody, but sometimes it takes me a couple of days because I get quite a few emails. I would ask people, though, please do not send me your dreams or your experiences. You know, those are yours to develop and explore. But if you need some guidance on that, I'd be happy to send some information your way.
Oh, great. Well, Sandy, this has been wonderful, and it's gone way too fast. There was so much more I wanted to cover. I'm going to have to get you back again. But, yeah, I'd love to get you back. And also, I just want to tell people how great your book is.